Hey everyone, and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm your host, Sharon Harding, and today we're discussing Windows 11 and AMD FSR. So yes, we are live, everybody, and we are taking questions from the audience as always. So if you have something you'd like to ask, just drop your question into the chat on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching this live, and we'll try to discuss it on air. So we've got Jared Walton in the house today. He is Tom's Hardware Senior GPU Editor. Welcome, Jared.
Howdy, Sharon.
Howdy, howdy. We also have Andrew Friedman, Tom's Hardware Senior Editor and PC Prince. What's up, Andrew?
You have a new title every time, and I don't know how to feel about it, but I'm doing okay. How are you?
I want to keep you guessing. I want to keep you coming back, Andrew.
So I got like the Fresh Prince of PC.
I got to keep changing my business cards.
So, Andrew, today was a big day for PC princes and princesses everywhere. Microsoft pulled their sheets off Windows 11 and gave us a look at the next Windows OS debuting this holiday season. So there's a lot to get into, but I guess we can start with Andrew. What would you say is the biggest or the new feature that you're most excited about?
Sure. I mean, it's big for non-nobility as well. I think for me, there's this is actually a lot of stuff. It's really hard to pick one feature. Obviously, I haven't had time to go hands-on with it. Insider builds will start coming out next week, but we won't see the full thing until holiday season. So it's hard to say exactly what one thing is, because I think they kind of suggested they earned the 11, right? Like it's not 10.5 or 10.2 or 10.8 or whatever. It really looks like they've done like a deep dive, and I'm sure somewhere in there's still some like Windows XP stuff. I think what excites me the most are a lot of what they're calling the snap features. There've been, Windows has always been pretty good for, putting everything on the desktop the way you want it, but there's always been some things that were finicky, like when you take it off of a dock, it might not remember where things are. So the fact they're having like a lot of different desktops where you can actually have a lot of different desktops, which you could in Windows 10, but now they can have different wallpapers. You can make one for school or work or for different projects is really cool. The fact that it's really easy to place things, I think that's great. And I think the new things they're doing for touch look really interesting. I mean, you look at Microsoft makes Surface. They need a good touch interface, and tablet mode was not it. So the idea that, you take off this keyboard, and now everything gets a little more spaced out. Everything gets a little bigger, making bigger touch targets. I think that's going to be really important for the experience going forward. And that's really just some aesthetic stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it. I think a lot of people just generally, when they get a new OS, whether it's on their phone or their computer, they expect it to look at least dramatically different, and then they complain about how it looks dramatically different, and cycle over again.
I mean, let's talk about it. And we saw it in the leaked builds the other week, but we saw it here too, right? The start menu and the taskbar are centered now. At least out of the box, it seems you can move them to the left, Jared. I say that because Jared was.
Yeah, I need those things on the left. I'm a creature of habit. Don't make me put them in the center.
I do think for people who are using touch, that'll be great. The launcher, it all looks like it all came out of Windows 10X, which was what was supposed to be their big foldable operating system. It was supposed to be like lightweight, kind of more like Chrome, and they just folded that in here into 11 when 10X was canceled. So it looks like we're going to get the best of Windows 10 with a lot of the modern quality of life features they put in there. And there's a bunch of other little things they've added. Microsoft Teams is going to be further integrated, so you'll be able to like get really quick video chatting. I guess that depends how much you love Teams. The widgets bar, which they sort of just added a new and interesting in 10, so it looks like it's coming back here. They're suggesting developers might want to develop for that. We will see. I think the other big thing that's interesting here is they're like largely redoing the Microsoft Store. I've never seen anyone terribly interested in downloading their apps from the Microsoft Store. I mean, unless you needed ones for, say, like an ARM application where that was the best way to know where it was. But they're doing a big thing here with the store because they're allowing Android apps. Now, you have to do it through Amazon, so there's a bit of a middleman, but it's no longer that you connect it from your phone, which is just an Android phone. You can have like a natively running Android app. Intel has some technology called Intel Bridge, which will work on Intel and AMD processors, and you'll just be able to run them. And that's a lot like what Apple has done for macOS, right? Where it can just run iOS apps automatically. So that's a big win for it there. They keep showing things like TikTok and Disney Plus, which don't yet have Windows apps. And I would love to see Disney Plus get a Windows app. So that would be great. But the other big thing is that they're allowing basically any type of software, progressive web apps, universal Windows apps, Win32. So they're going to have a lot more apps, and they're saying it's going to be a lot more friendly to developers. Satya Nadella spoke at the end. He took a lot of punches at Apple. We're really talking about making the Microsoft Store and Windows as a platform, a place where you'll want to develop and build because it's open and it's fair. And they were saying, look, they'll still take their cut, which Microsoft had already reduced. Or if you have your own commerce engine, you plug that in, they won't take a cut. You can just use their store. Now, is that going to make people want to develop for Windows? I don't know, but it sure as heck seems really fair, right? So I think that's a big deal. They already had dropped to 15% from 30%, and now they're saying you don't have to do it at all. So that's kind of nice.
So we're talking Windows 11 features, and we have a question from Gem Sparkles about Windows 11 and what it'll offer. They asked, has Microsoft announced any new ease of access features? The lack of such features in the late 90s caused my father to give up on programming AI in college in favor of attending law school. So first, it sounds like your dad has a good job either way. So congratulations to that. But what about ease of access features, which I guess those are like accessibility and things like that?
Right. So much stuff was dumped today. I can't say I specifically remember them discussing ease of access features. They've been showing off their new and improved dark mode, which I think a lot of people might like. And if perhaps you're sensitive to brighter lights, you might really like that. We haven't gotten to really dig into the settings to see what else they've added, so it's hard to say. I do think a lot of what they're doing with touch might do it. And a lot of the stuff they did with the touch keyboard specifically seemed really interesting, in that now it's much more like an Android phone where you could grab one side of the tablet and just sort of swipe with your thumb. And they said that you can do text to speech that will auto punctuate. So I think that those sort of double as ease of access features, even if they're just good for everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
So I hope that helps answer that.
I want to try out that auto punctuation on the speech. I actually used to use Dragon Naturally Speaking, and if you tried to let it do the punctuation, it screwed up way too often, and I just end up dictating your periods and commas and such. But I mean, AI research and machine learning could have made that a lot better. We'll see.
I just hope
maybe we'll be out of jobs soon, and we'll have to go to law school.
I just hope it understands my speech better than it understands my handwriting. But it's some cool handwriting stuff in there. It sounds like it's going to require new hardware, so you probably won't have it in your existing stuff. But the idea that they're going to have haptic feedback for a stylus, that opens up a lot of ideas. Again, is that ease of use? I don't know, but it sounds like it could be cool.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing we could say is that at least in today's event wasn't a big focus for the reveal. So I guess we'll have to stay tuned to see what else they will or will not deliver in that category. So Binary Watcher doesn't seem too pumped about the next Windows. First, they're vomiting. They're commenting with a vomiting emoji saying not another Windows version, but they have a question. Is it going to screw up all our game settings like Windows updates do, or worse? I don't know if we have the answer to that.
I'm curious yes to which game settings he's talking about specifically, because I've gone through a lot of updates and I don't really notice it. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that. First of all, you don't have to update to Windows 11. I don't think anybody's forcing you, as long as you don't, click the button. Windows 10 is going to be supported through 2025. So if you like Windows 10, you can stick with that.
Hopefully Windows 11 doesn't start auto-installing on people.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens there. There are some gaming things. The one thing it may automatically do is auto HDR. I don't think that technically counts the type of thing that Binary Watcher is asking, but I'm using it as a great segue.
Yeah, do it, Andrew.
And so if it detects HDR enhancements to games, you have the right monitors, they're just going to turn those on, which in theory should make for better color, it should make it more vivid, and should make it a wider range of brightness. So that would be really cool. And the other thing they're doing for gaming is they're using a technology they call direct storage, which is based off the velocity architecture from the Xbox Series X and Series S, which has allowed games to load really fast. So it's good to see that the PC, which it's had SSDs for so long, will be on par, and that Microsoft will be focusing on both the PC and the Xbox at the same time for SSD. They also push Game Pass a lot, and that's not really new to Windows 10, right? Game Pass is already or to Windows 11, but they want you to know there's Game Pass. So, but they're clearly still driving down, despite the fact they have Game Pass on streaming. They're clearly still using things like direct storage, and they kept talking about all your peripherals and all this stuff about having the hardware. So they're clearly focusing on that. I hope it doesn't change anything in anybody's games.
I'm actually really excited to try those direct storage enhanced games. Like I've seen plenty of games that take forever to load, even on a really fast system. So I'm like, hey, if I can get into a game like Grand Theft Auto in 30 seconds or 10 seconds rather than, what's it take right now? Like 90 seconds? It's pretty bad. So that would be awesome to see a lot of games adopt. We'll have to wait and see how many do, though.
So a question about the auto HDR, that'll just apply to any SDR content, correct? And you don't need an HDR display to turn the feature on, correct?
Unclear. I believe if the game has HDR, if the game first of all, the game has to support auto HDR. It doesn't simply work.
Okay.
But it sounds like if there are HDR enhancements to add, they will do it. I'm not 100% sure on the monitor part there. But
yeah, because
if you already have a game with HDR support, doesn't it work already though? Like what's the new magic? It seemed to me like they were actually talking about taking it for SDR content and doing an auto HDR, but I misunderstood.
That was my interpretation as well, which is already a feature that other manufacturers offer in different forms. Like some monitors have a feature like that where you could give it an HDR effect. Which, I bring that up because there's only so far you can, push the image, right? Because you're limited to what screen you actually have. Like, what makes HDR so awesome is, truly high contrast. And most, monitors around, like, let's say 1,000 to 1. I'm talking about like 20,000 to 1 or even higher, or contrast that's so high that it's almost infinite because it's an OLED panel and the blacks are at 0 because it's turning off individual pixels. And HDR is using a wider color space and a lot of SDR displays. So you can only really push it so far. And I wonder about things getting like washed out or a little too dark in the interest of making a higher contrast effect. So I'd love to see it actually, in action.
Yeah, looking at some old developer blogs where they're first talking about it, it looks like they do recommend an HDR display to use the features. So there's that. They did talk about some of the games, Age of Empires Definitive Edition, Rocket League, DayZ, Doom 64. But I think that's something we're really gonna have to check out to fully understand. I guess which ones work. Do you need the HDR display? I'm sure the HDR display helps, right? It's like watching 4K content on a 1080p screen. It provides a little bit, I guess, but I don't know. Point is they have some gaming features. It was not the biggest point here, but they are throwing a bone. I'm very curious to see if there are also any performance improvements because the minimum specs are a little bit higher.
So we have some more questions on the new OS. Nyan Punikar asks, does Windows 11 support Android apps? Why would we need that though?
It's a good question.
So it does.
So, yes, Windows 11 supports Android apps through that Amazon store. Why do you need that? Some people might not need that. I first saw the most similar stuff on Chromebooks and on Mac OS, which use it. And for instance, on Mac OS, on my phone, I use a podcast app that isn't built into iOS. And that podcast app was also not built into Mac OS. So when I first tried the M1 MacBook Pro, I took that app that I use on my phone. It's called Overcast. It's a podcast app I really recommend. And I was able to use it on the laptop, and it worked really well. So in this case, if you're on a Windows PC and there's an app that isn't on the Windows Store, for instance, they were using TikTok as a big example. Oh, I want to watch some TikToks. Sure, you can go through the website, or you could go through the app where you would always use it and use it like it's on your phone. If you have a touch screen, you might even be able to play some games that way. Is it going to be the best experience? I don't know. We're going to have to test that out. But if there are apps you love using on your Android phone and you want to be able to use them on Windows, you'll be able to do it. And if that's a podcast app or a note-taking app or even an email app, will that be as good as using something made for Windows 10? Probably not. It might be a little weird, but it's definitely a way to like add a lot more software to Windows 10 that wasn't there previously and will now just be available.
Yeah, and you could do Android apps on a Windows PC anyway through like BlueStacks or one of these Android emulators, but now it gets rid of that, need to install separate software. Now you can just run it directly through the Amazon app, which, I mean, that's kind of, I don't know. Can you get all the apps through Amazon, or are there some that are still missing? Probably, but
I imagine
it opens up a large number of apps.
Yeah, that
have to build them for Windows Phone.
Yeah, they weren't there yesterday, but they're there now.
Yeah, and I guess it all also ties into that whole theme of being more open and letting everything be more accessible and letting more developers come into the Windows world, and that whole vibe that the whole reveal had as well. So I'm curious what Jared thinks. I know you watched the presentation as well, Jared. Were you impressed? Did you think there would be more? You're already laughing. I want to know what you think.
I kind of watched the presentation. Like, I felt it was a little over the top at the beginning. Like, oh, it's just like home. Like he was like being so emotional about this stuff we're trying to be. And I'm just like rolling my eyes going, it's a Windows operating system. It's not going to make me like get emotional and cry or anything.
I thought he was going to cry. At first. Like, honestly,
like he was trying to. Yeah. So.
I'm sure if you do work on something like this, it probably is very emotional to finally show it to the world.
Well, it's like your baby, I guess.
They've probably had a lot of programmers and artists and all that working for years on this, so I do get that. But I'm just like, I did feel like that was kind of funny. I was like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. That
was when we could watch the stream, right? During the points where it had
that
crashed.
was the other thing. I was like, for a big major announcement, maybe you should have like opened it up to other platforms. I know they did have it on Twitter and they had it on Facebook. I'm like, so why not YouTube? Apple does YouTube. It's just weird. And the Microsoft stream crashed so many times for me that I kind of got frustrated and shut it off at one point, and then I went back and watched it later. But I mean, like as a showcase for what Azure video streaming could do, or like Microsoft Teams or whatever video, like that was not good. That was a really bad look. I'm like, yeah, you just made YouTube look way better compared to your video solution.
Yeah. Luckily, they did move it over to Twitter, which was really clear. I happened to tell Microsoft we couldn't watch the stream, and they told us they apologized for the inconvenience. Their explanation is that they saw stronger demand than they expected, and they quickly worked to scale the network. It is on demand if you want to go back and watch it. I know some of us did, but it was also on Twitter. And at this point, there's so much coverage on it on tomshardware.com and other sites that, of course, you can get it there too.
I don't think there's any coverage on other sites.
There's no coverage on other sites.
Only on Tom's Hardware, exclusive.
Just on Tom's Hardware. The other big thing I want to talk about on this is the minimum specifications, the whole thing. First of all, this is going to be a free upgrade if you have Windows 10. But, and this is a weird but, that they have changed the minimum specifications from Windows 10 to Windows 11. And for the most part, there are tons of PCs with 2 gigabytes of RAM out there, but you need a 1 gigahertz, 2 or more cores processor compatible 64-bit CPU. You need DirectX 12 graphics, 4 gigabytes of RAM, 64 gigabytes of storage. These aren't hard bars to clear, but they are requiring TPM 2.0. And that is for security. It encrypts passwords and biometric login. And like, there's definitely a security argument for including it, right? And if you got a laptop in the last couple of years, like it's probably already there. But we were definitely talking about like, if you built your own PC, you might not have gone out and bought a TPM module. Like it might just not be there. And so we've been experimenting since the announcement was made. Like I took that desktop behind me, which is way above the minimum specs. And it was telling me, because they have a checker, it said, no, you can't do it. I went into my BIOS, I was able to turn on a firmware TPM, and then it worked fine. I have been talking to some people, some of them saying this fixes it, some saying it's not working yet right for them. I think there's a lot of confusion over the TPM. I don't think Microsoft announced this particularly well. They just kind of dropped it in there. And I think a lot of people who don't understand what it is or where to get it, or if their motherboard or their processor supports it, I think that's going to be a bit of an issue for some people upgrading even in the enthusiast community.
Yeah, and there's got to be a lot of older PCs that still run pretty well that will be left out because of the TPM requirement, unless there's like some workaround that Microsoft didn't get into yet or whatever. We'll have to see when it comes out. But I mean,
yes, I've reached out to them. They have not yet given us more information. But like, for instance, I have a 3rd gen Ryzen in there, and that worked. But Michelle Earhart, one of our staff writers, she has a 6th gen Intel Core, and her motherboard has a header, so she should be able to go out and buy, maybe $15-20 TPM module and install it. But that's a pain in the butt, and she had to go digging through the BIOS to see, does it work, and it's just inconvenient. And I think Microsoft could have come up with better messaging for this for the enthusiast community. The other thing they require that might anger some people is that Windows 11 Home is going to require internet connectivity and a Microsoft account to complete device setup the first time. So we're going to see if that upsets people or not. I mean, offline accounts, for us, they're great for testing. I don't know how many people are going to want just to have those accounts for the sake of having it, but it seems like you're going to need it for a lot of features.
Well, we'll have to see what they actually mean, because it's like, you don't activate Windows until you go online as it is, right? So is that what they mean? Like, you got to connect and then you activate your Windows and it opens up more features. What features get locked out? There's a lot of questions that we just need to find the answers to when it actually releases, which they didn't announce the actual date. They said, what, holiday this year? Which I'm sitting there going, November 11th, right?
And that would make a lot of sense, like 11/11, no matter where you are in the world, right? And we've started getting the messaging from the OEMs as well. So, emails from like Dell and Acer and Lenovo saying, we have laptops now and they're going to work. You get them now, you'll get them. You don't have to wait for Windows 11. But I'm sure they're also going to do a huge marketing push around Windows 11, right? Because I think that's going to be a big selling point. Windows 10 has been around for years. Now say, we have the new Windows, get this laptop with that. So I think there'll be a big push and a lot of new designs that we'll see around the holiday season, unless they want to wait for CES.
To your knowledge, Andrew, and again, I know this was just announced a couple hours ago or a few hours ago. Do you know why Windows 11 is requiring that TPM 2.0 chip? From what I understand, I actually thought maybe it was tied to Windows Hello, facial, and biometric logins, but you can already do that without requiring a TPM chip currently. So why the need for the TPM 2.0 on Windows 11? Is it just so they could say it's the most secure Windows ever? Like, what is the actual need?
I think that does help them say it's the most secure Windows ever, and that really every device running it will be inherently more secure. I can't answer. I don't know anyone inside Microsoft who's talking about this, about why. We've asked Microsoft, we haven't received an answer about the TPM, if there will be workarounds or if it will be optional. I'm hoping that they called it the most secure version, and I'm hoping that this makes it true. Again, I think they kind of screwed the pooch a little bit on the announcement, and that it's going to lock some people out, or some people are going to be confused. We can only hope for further clarification from them on that. I am hoping that it makes things like Windows Hello and biometrics more secure. Don't get me wrong. I'm hoping it works, but I don't think there's been a lot of clarity there.
Fair enough.
Doesn't Apple's current stuff, for a while now, they've all integrated TPM 2?
Yeah, Apple has its T2 security chip, which they use a lot for a lot of things TPM used for, right? It's effectively TPM, and they use that for biometrics and making sure that there's system integrity and things like that. So they seem to be going a similar way, but they're not using a custom chip for it. That's Apple's own custom hardware that just ships and everything. So we'll see how that works.
I'm just wondering if it's kind of maybe that's why Microsoft did it. At least that kind of gives them that feature parity, and they say, "Oh yeah, we got security too." I don't know.
That does make some sense.
Yeah.
Everyone's just copying one another. Yeah. Welcome to tech.
I mean, it will also root out some older devices, right? For better or for worse, they may be inherently less secure, but it also kind of stinks for those people.
Yeah, and forces the new PC upgrade. Yeah. time to give them money. All right. So if you have more questions about Windows 11, what we saw today, definitely drop them in. We got Andrew here. After the show, of course, you can head to tomshardware.com. We got a lot of coverage there on some of the different features that we're expecting. So in the meantime, Jared, we know AMD has finally responded to NVIDIA's AI-based image upscaling technology, DLSS, which we've talked about plenty on this show. So AMD's take is called FidelityFX Super Resolution, which is way too much to say for most people. So we're calling it AMD FSR. Jared, you've been testing FSR performance. What can you tell us about what it can or can't do for gamers?
Performance and image quality. We didn't just look at performance, right? So it's interesting because, image upscaling algorithms have been around for a while. I mentioned in our article on it, I'm like, I remember Blu-ray players that were like, hey, we'll upscale your DVD content. And now there's like the 4K Blu-ray players, the Blu-ray Ultra that will upscale your 1080p content and things of that nature. And some upscaling algorithms look better than others. There are smart TVs or HD TVs that will try and upscale SD content as well. So it's not like a new algorithm, and there's a lot of prior art in terms of how to do this effectively. AMD sounds like they're basically doing a spatial upscaling, kind of a quick and dirty, like a bicubic upscale, and then they apply their contrast aware sharpening filter. Probably a little bit more than that, but they do recommend you turn off CAS for the screenshots for the before and after. And it's like, well, wait, if the game has CAS, FidelityFX CAS, right? And you turn it off, in my opinion, it looks worse. And so I'm like, you're making the game look worse so that when you upscale it via FSR, maybe it looks the same as the not as good non-CAS version. But anyway, the basic idea is pretty simple. Render at a lower resolution, render more pixels, upscale them. And if you can do that fast enough, you get a boost in performance and everyone's happy. And if you do it well enough, then image quality doesn't degrade. FSR has 4 presets or 4 options right now. I believe they're talking about a dynamic upscaling solution as well that will, scale between native and whatever it needs to in order to maintain a frame rate or whatever. But right now you've got ultra quality, which uses 1.3x scaling. The quality mode does 1.5x scaling. Balance does 1.7x and performance does 2x. And that's in both dimensions. So like 2x upscaling means you're taking 1080p content to 4K. Or if you're on 1440p, you're taking 720p content to 1440p. Needless to say, the lower the source resolution, the worse the upscaling looks. If you're doing the performance mode, I'm like, yeah, you can really tell that it's a little blurrier and all that stuff, but it runs a lot faster. So I only tested a few games. Like I tested Godfall and Terminator Resistance because those were both a little easier to benchmark. There's also Evil Genius 2. That doesn't seem to be a super demanding game. There's Anno 1800, which looked like it could be relatively demanding, but it's kind of this top-down city builder game that I was like, I don't know, benchmarks of that just always feel a little weird because you don't need to run at 60 frames per second on a city builder to get a good experience. So I tested those 2 games, Godfall and Terminator Resistance. I tested at the default mode with it off, and then you've got the ultra quality mode, and then the balanced mode was what I used as kind of like a blend between the performance and the quality mode. And
do you want to check out those charts, Jared? Yeah,
we can throw them up. So you've got Terminator Resistance. This is no FSR. You can see of the GPUs I tested, 3060 Ti and above to get 60 frames per second. Again, this is at 4K, so that's a relatively demanding resolution, but the game doesn't seem to be that demanding in and of itself. So flip over to the next chart. I didn't want to try and put all the numbers on one chart because it gets really messy and stuff trying to differentiate between different FSR levels. So
one moment.
always tricky doing these things.
Yeah, it never works as expected, huh? Just one moment.
But
So we're
the
on
net result,
Terminator.
yeah, Terminator FSR on. And this, I believe we had the balanced mode. You can go to the article. We've got balanced and ultra quality as well.
Oh, this is
One
with it
more.
off.
Yes. The net result, though, is in balanced mode. So that is rendering a lot less pixels. But performance pretty much doubled or more than doubled in some case across the gamut. If you we can't flip back and forth between them easily here, I don't think, but you can see the RX 574 gigabyte. This is 4K and it's still getting 36 frames per second. Like, it's not awesomely fast, but it's playable. Everything from the RX 5600 XT and above got 60 frames per second, and that's a good result. So there you got it off and on. So, the 570 showed the biggest gains because it only had 4 gigabytes of memory. So it went from like 12 frames per second to 36 frames per second. It tripled its performance. It doesn't look as clear as native 4K, but it's like a compromise a lot of people, I think, will be willing to make. More interestingly, and it's not in these charts, I tested Terminator on Intel's integrated graphics UHD 630, and at 1600 by 900 running medium quality, it got, I want to say, 19 frames per second. And then with FSR in performance mode, so again, you're sacrificing a lot of your image quality. It's rendering 800 by 450, but that got 38 frames per second. So it took a game that was effectively unplayable on Intel integrated graphics to a playable level. And I think that's something that your low spec gamers will definitely appreciate. It's one of those where it's like, man, I wish we could have that in a lot more games, because that would open up the barrier to entry for a lot of gamers. But it's going to have to be implemented on a per game basis, because you want to upscale and then draw the UI over the top of the upscaled image so that text and things like that are clear, which means the game itself has to integrate support. Like, you can do upscaling and sharpening. Both AMD and Nvidia support that via their drivers, but it doesn't look as good as like the FSR upscaling, where you upscale and then draw the UI over it. So, and other games do that already, like Flight Simulator does it. Not God of War, Mordor, Shadow of War, like that
Kingdom of
does
Earth.
upscaling. Yeah, there's a ton of
I
games.
have your Godfall charts up now too.
Oh, Godfall's interesting in that it's AMD promoted, and it is like super epic settings. It's really memory intensive on your graphics card. So you can see like the 6800 XT beats the 3080 here, and you've got like the 3060 Ti, because it only has 8 gig of RAM, struggles quite a bit there, and kind of goes down from there. I didn't even try testing a 4 gigabyte card, but the 6 gigabyte cards like the 1060, 1660 Super, even the RTX 2060, they just can't manage it at 4K at all. But then when you turn on FSR, because it's rendering at a lower resolution, that kind of frees up the VRAM requirements a bit and boosts performance again almost 2x. I think the average was like an 80% increase for balanced mode. And different games will show different scaling, but as a quick and easy, like, hey, flip the switch and you can get more performance, I think it's a nice option. Is it better than DLSS? It's different. Like, if you consider DLSS, it's like, well, you have to have an RTX card, which effectively locks out a whole lot of gamers. FSR works on everything. So, in that sense, from a compatibility standpoint, it's a huge win for AMD. Image quality, I still think FSR, I think, looks worse than DLSS. DLSS does a lot more computational work. It's taking as inputs not just a spatial upscaling of the current frame, but it takes previous frames and uses a temporal feedback so that it can come closer to looking like native resolution. And it also runs that whole AI deep learning neural network thing to, enhance things, and that's trained off of 16K inputs from 1080p sources or 4K sources. I don't know. I think it's 1080p to 16K is what they use for their training algorithm. So it's like, well, it's got a lot of inputs and it does things differently, and it's proprietary and it's restricted to RTX cards. So I think DLSS is actually a really cool technology, but for everyone who doesn't have an RTX card, this is going to be, maybe not as good, but it will be usable.
So I know this is almost irrelevant because DLSS 2.1 is here, but I'm just curious, Jared, is FSR as good as the first version of DLSS?
It's hard to say for certain because we don't have any game that supports both of those technologies. I will say, like, when the first version of DLSS came out, there were a lot. It used spatial upscaling, AI trained spatial upscaling, but it wasn't using temporal feedback. It wasn't using prior frames. And so the net result was it didn't look as good. And I thought DLSS 1.0, even in its highest quality mode, was okay at best. It was something where I'm like, if you needed the frames, sure, turn it on, but it was also limited. So like Battlefield 5, if you had a 2080, you couldn't turn on DLSS at 1080p. You had to be at 1440p or 4K. I might have those requirements not quite right, but it varied by game. So I know like Shadow of the Tomb Raider supports DLSS 1.0. And if you're running on a 3080, you can't enable DLSS if you're not at 4K or 1440p. So, and that was because I think there was like kind of limitations, like the DLSS network. If you're looking at frame times, this is how long it takes to render a frame. And it's like, well, if your DLSS takes too much time, then it doesn't boost your performance. And so they would try and disable it for cases where it didn't help. DLSS 2.0, they made it run faster. And on some hardware, I believe on the 30 series, you can actually, like, you render the frame in your frame time, and then while the next frame is rendering, the tensor cores do the DLSS work, and then the frame gets shown, which means it all runs concurrently and you get higher performance that way as well. So there's lots of stuff going on with DLSS, but I would say subjectively, from what I remember, probably FSR in ultra quality mode is at least as good as DLSS 1.0 in its quality mode. I guess it didn't have quality mode. It was just on or off, right? So DLSS 1.0 was probably no better than FSR ultra quality and probably more like FSR quality mode. And it required a lot more computational performance to get there. Like I want to say the performance hit from the FSR calculations seems to be maybe 10%, meaning like if you're running 1440p native compared to 4K using the quality preset, which is upscaling 1440p content, it will probably be 10% lower if you're doing 4K quality. But I don't have all of those exact numbers, but there is a little bit of a performance hit for it.
Also, I think one thing we did mention is that at the very least, Xbox came out. The Xbox Series X and S, I think, are also both getting support for this. So we'll be able to see this beyond the PC at some point.
Yeah, this is. I mean, it's part of AMD's GPU Open platform or library, and I probably should know this, but I don't off the top of my head. I think that means developers can get access to the full source code, and they're free to run with it and do whatever they want with it.
I believe it's open. It's open source. The other thing, it's funny, I was looking at the games you were testing, and I pulled up the full list, and it's not a very long list right now of games that support FidelityFX Super Resolution. And I'm like, I'm going to insult somebody because this is one of these games is going to be somebody's favorite game, right? I'm like, Godfall, Evil Genius 2, World Domination, Then I see what's coming up, like Resident Evil Village. I'm playing that now. That would be cool, right? And Far Cry 6 and Dota 2, I'm sure for a lot of people will help. For a long time, people kind of harked on Nvidia for saying there's not enough games. Granted, when Nvidia was doing it, they were selling a specific GPU, right? So it mattered how many games they had because you were trying to sell not just DLSS, but RTX. And not enough games had ray tracing and not enough games had DLSS. But this is not a big amount of games. Like I mean, on the other hand, AMD is doing it and it works on everything, so that's good. But I think to really get people excited about it, they're going to need to get this on a lot more titles. And I'm sure now that it's here, now that it's here, it'll be easier to start games with it already enabled as they make new ones. But I'm not sure how many people are going to like see this immediately.
Yeah, I mean the list of games. Let's run through. So there's 7 games that currently support FSR. Anno 1800. I've heard of it. It seems like a pretty good city builder. If that's not your thing, you probably would never play it. Godfall, an AMD promotional title. I hate to say it, but I don't think it's a great game. It's not super fun. It's got a built-in benchmark. That's why I've used it, but it's not like it wasn't a super high scoring game. I don't think if you look on like Metacritic or PC Gamer or whoever.
Yeah, people didn't love that game.
Yeah, King's Hunt. I've never heard of it before now. Rift Breaker, another game that was promoted by AMD. That's an RTS. I've fallen off the RTS bandwagon, so I didn't really care. Terminator Resistance. It seems okay as a Terminator game if you like that world, but I don't know that it was a super like well-known game. 22nd Century Racing Series. I think I heard of it, but I've never played it. Evil Genius 2. I played it. It's all right. Then you've got 12 more games coming soon. Far Cry 6. That's the big one. Resident Evil Village. Another big one. Forspoken, Myst, Dota 2, Necromunda, Higher Gun, Baldur's Gate, Swordsman. Swordsman's like the translation of some Chinese or Japanese or whatever game. Farming Simulator 22. Astergos, Vampire the Masquerade, Blood Hunt, not the what's the upcoming one, Bloodlines, right? And Edge of Eternity. So I think there's a couple games that will be big on that, Resident Evil and Far Cry, but most of the others are just kind of like, well, it's there. Hopefully they get a lot more games.
2 might.
Yeah,
like Dota 2 is an
big.
existing game, but like for the
but it's super
players,
lightweight, right? Like
yeah.
Dota 2 runs on kind of anything, so I'm like, so
You
this
run
is to
Dota
make
2 on a toothbrush.
yeah. So it's an interesting list. It's worth noting, like DLSS is, according to Nvidia, it's now on more than 55 games. It's actually on 58 is the current count of released games, and it's coming into more every month. Like, so it's part of Unreal Engine, it's part of Unity. Lots of other big developers have supported it. So once you've implemented it once, it should be easier to implement it in future games. That means we'll see a lot of DLSS games still going forward. But FSR, I mean FidelityFX, there's a bunch of different FX that you can do with FidelityFX, but it's used in 45 games, and that number has been growing steadily as well. So hopefully with the console tie-in, because AMD provides the hardware for both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series SX, I think we'll see a lot more games that will start using FSR as well down the road. So who wins long term? Check back in a year or two. Maybe it will be like G-Sync and FreeSync. Maybe it won't. I got a little background.
I know, I'm trying not to laugh.
and he broke his arm this past, well, it's been like over a week now. He got on a neighbor's. we just moved to Colorado, and he went over to the neighbor's house, and like a minute later I hear screaming, and he full on broke his arm. And I won't get too descriptive, but it was a clean break. Like his arm was bent.
We're a family channel, so.
Yeah. Is that why he's so blurry? No, I'm kidding.
No, that would be Nvidia broadcast. Woo!
All right, so we're coming near the end of our show, so I want to get through some of the comments we have and questions. So Gem Sparkles, please thank Mr. Alcorn. For those who don't know, that's our CPU editor, for the wonderful article comparing the 5600X to the 11600K. It helped me choose the 5600X for my Gundam build in honor of Miss Earhart, our staff writer.
Oh my God, we have like super fans now.
We were talking Gundam, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. Gem Sparkles, we definitely want to see your Gundam build. Hold on. I'll figure out a way for us to see those safely. And I want to put Michelle's info on here. People will go crazy. PR will go crazy. Can he do what?
If you click on the author name, the byline under an article, I think doesn't that get you to an email? Maybe not.
If you go to our About Us page, most of us have our emails listed there. You can send them there.
There you go. Well, thank you so much. We'll definitely let Paul know, and we love to hear those stories. So thank you so much. So what else do we have? Oh, we have a couple comments on FSR. Ruru2M believes getting the console adaptation will be the huge win for FSR. Tatar Khan also agrees. I think this will go great on consoles for sure to allow them to run more games at 4K. Jared, what do you think? Are consoles really what might put FSR on the map?
I mean, the previous gen consoles were already doing image upscaling. So, it was kind of necessary for, like, let's be clear, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, their CPU was a very limiting factor. So hitting 60 FPS was often difficult, and they were just targeting 30 FPS. With Ryzen processors in the new generation consoles, like, they can definitely hit 60 frames per second and more. So now it becomes more like our PCs, where you're like, okay, what's it take to hit 4K at 60 frames per second? And it's hard to do. Like, a 3080 will usually do it. A 6800 XT will usually do it. But those are both way more powerful than the GPUs that are in the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. But throw in some image upscaling, it's like, okay, so you render at like 1/2 the resolution, 1/2 the pixels, right? So you use the ultra quality or quality mode or somewhere in between there, and you upscale that, and the net result should be pretty dang close to native quality. In motion, you probably won't see it. And, if you give me a game running at 35 frames per second native 4K versus a game running at 60 frames per second and upscaled 4K that looks close enough to 4K or close enough to native 4K, I'm going to say, yeah, give me the 60 frames per second. So I think a lot of console gamers and a lot of people with just modest hardware will really appreciate the boost in frame rates that this can get. And I mean, you can do it by lowering quality settings too in a lot of games. You don't need to run at ultra quality. High quality, medium quality often look just as good. So it's not like we couldn't do this before, but it's one more knob for the tweakers to play with as they see fit.
So we have a comment from Nyan saying, YouTuber Moore's Law is dead. Recently said in their video that Nvidia is just letting AMD take the spotlight and will release DLSS 2.2 with massive improvements, and it seems legit. So
DLSS 2.2 is technically out, and it kind of just got pushed out without a lot of fanfare. I believe the main change is DLSS 2.2 for games that implement that spec. They might be able to do dynamic upscaling, meaning not set resolutions, but I need to check on that. Like, for those who don't know, 2.0 was the big one that changed a lot of the underlying algorithm and added temporal upscaling. 2.1, the big change was that it added support for ultra performance mode, 9x upscaling. And I think it also added support for VR upscaling. So,
but what about just like the next version of DLSS?
Yeah,
if it's not like 2.2, like whatever, 2.3.
I don't know how much more NVIDIA can like wring out of this. They always say DLSS gets better over time. Like, DLSS 2.0 is good, right? And so it's like, well, fundamentally, how much better can it get without rendering at native quality? And I'm skeptical that we'll ever get to the point where 1080p upscaled to 4K will look as good as native 4K. I don't care what algorithm you use. I just don't think it's going to quite get there. So will there be a DLSS 3.0 at some point? Maybe. I mean, NVIDIA tried to preempt the FSR launch by announcing like their latest driver update and support for DLSS in a couple other games on Monday when AMD launched on Tuesday, and they briefed us and reminded us of all the things that go into DLSS. And it's an impressive algorithm, but it's not the only way to do upscaling. And if you can do it with more compatibility, I think people will appreciate that.
A question from Elite QB Rogers. Do I need to enable DLSS? Yes, you do. In a supported game, you'll go in the game settings.
Nobody's making you do it. Like, you
you don't have to.
If you've got a game that you play that supports it and you've got an RTX card, like especially quality mode, like I really like DLSS quality mode. It just feels like, hey, it looks as good as native and it runs faster. So why wouldn't I want that?
Yeah, and again, Jared has done a lot of testing on it. So if you want to check out our website and check out the performance and his experiences there, you can like get a good experience, or honestly just try it. Like I love going into different levels, turning it on and off, and playing with it and seeing how it looks, and keeping the frame rate counter on, and just playing with it yourself and seeing what you experience. So we often get questions kind of like this that are a joke, but I'm going to have some faith and think this is a genuine question. I'm going to answer it. Somebody asked, why is your website and channel called Tom's Hardware? Who is Tom? Long story short, Tom Paps banned the website, so it's called Tom's Hardware. He's no longer affiliated with the site, but that's how we got our name, for those who wondered.
You want to know, I actually read Tom's Hardware when I was in college 25 years ago, studying computer science, and I had a computer architecture class that we were doing, and I really enjoyed the hardware and architecture class, so I was like, this is cool. And then this website came out, and it was sys.pair.com at the time. And I read one of these articles, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. This is like exactly the stuff that I'm learning in my class applied to the real world. So I thought that was really neat back in the day. And I also found On Tech way back in that time frame. So that kind of became my hardware nerd journey. And then I ended up writing for On Tech, and then switching to PC Gamer, and then switching to Tom's Hardware. So, it's been a nice long journey, but I do remember Thomas Paps back in the day and just being like, hey, this is cool to see practical application of the stuff that I was studying in college.
Yeah, most people say Tom's Hardware has been going uphill for about 25 years. So we just keep getting better and better. So thank you to everyone who's been watching. Thank you for the questions. Love talking with you guys. Please don't forget to like us on Facebook, YouTube, and our Twitch channel so you can stay caught up with all of our great content and videos. We also make every episode of the Tom's Hardware Show available as a podcast. So thank you to Andrew and Jared for stopping by. Again, check out the website for a lot of great coverage on Windows 11 and also Jared's FSR testing. And that is our show. We'll see you next Thursday.